irresponsible sister-in-law neglects her sick children and is trying to get me and my pregnant wife to watch the children. It's good to always establish boundaries between you and people, no matter how close or important they might be to you. This is a very important lesson I learned after suffering for my ignorance. I come from an average family, the first son and child among 3 boys and 1 girl. My parents raised us right and provided us as much as they could, and they made it a point of emphasis to instill in us the need to turn out better than they had in life. I got into college to study civil engineering, and I was quite serious with my work. But girls in my department flocked around me for obvious reasons. I was the brightest in class, coupled with the fact that I was a handsome guy too. Although I enjoyed the attention that I was given as virtually everyone wanted pleasing me, I did not let the fact that the ladies threw themselves at me to distract from what I was there to do. A lady by the name of Nicole soon caught my attention in our second year. Nicole was in my department and she treated me like I was not a celebrity. This was just what endeared me to her. We became friends, and though she was not as smart, intelligent, and bright as I was, I cherished her friendship because I was sure that I was relating with someone who was not following me because of my status. Our friendship soon grew deeper and we began dating in my final year. Nicole was refined. It was clear that she was not from a wealthy home, but the way she carried herself caused her mates to accord her some respect. We both graduated successfully, and while I got a job within the city, Nicole got a job offer outside the city and she took it. We kept in touch, but distance was beginning to affect our relationship. I knew there was every possibility that she could be taken away from me, as it was easy to fall for her personality. And I would have a hard time coming across another woman like Nicole. So I decided to officially make her mine. At least that way, I could have a little peace of mind, so I proposed to her, and guys, she actually said yeah. It was at that point that I decided to take her to go see my parents. My parents loved Nicole to bits. It did not take long for them to see that she was hospitable. They were sure she would properly take care of their son. I was happy that things were going smoothly between Nicole and I. We began planning about the wedding, but something was off. Nicole always avoided any discussion that had to do with family. I pressed severely to meet with her people, but the more I tried, the more she evaded the issue. To make matters worse, she demanded that we had a secret wedding with just my family members in attendance. It sounded really suspicious. How could I get married to a lady whom I've never met, her parents who were still alive? It did not just make sense. Various thoughts began going through my mind as to what she was trying to hide. I began putting pressure on her, and she had no reason whatsoever for not wanting me to meet with her parents, or not wanting her family present at the wedding. After days of mounting pressure on her, she finally caved in. Nicole took me to see her parents, and it was then I had an understanding of why she had refused doing so since. There was no semblance between Nicole and her people. Her both parents were alive, and she had an older sister called Wendy, who had 2 children. Nicole's family was dysfunctional, to say the least. It was simply not the kind of family one would wish to be married into. Her father was a drunk who squandered his salary as a security personnel on drinks. Her mother was a busybody who slept around with many men, and her older sister was no different. It's still surprising that Nicole turned out different. I had expected that her refined lady, who I was going to make my wife, would be the product of a family that was equally refined, but oh, the reverse was the case. My experience at Nicole's family house was a distasteful one. Had I not been the one who needed their approval to marry their daughter, I would have taken my leave a few minutes after I got there. Her mother and sister went about the house looking for one thing or the other, while her father, who spoke with me, was barely involved in the discussion. They all acted like I was not present. I guess that was because it was clear to them that I was not rich. To visit Nicole's family was enough to discourage any suitor from marrying either of their daughters, but I was not at all discouraged. I loved Nicole and I was willing to look past her family. Besides, she was the one I was going to get married to and would live with that, not her family. That was my mindset, but my parents thought otherwise. I knew that at some point that both of the families would need to meet before the wedding, even though neither Nicole nor I wanted to because it would end up a disaster. Well, the both families did meet at Nicole's family house, and my parents were not the least impressed by what they saw. They patiently waited till we got home, and that's when they began telling me to reconsider my decision of getting married to Nicole. My parents suggested that it was highly probable that Nicole was being hypocritical. They felt there's no way she could have a father who did not care for both his wife and daughter and were running wild and still remain unaffected by their lifestyle. I was not pleased with the opinions of my parents. How could they suggest that Nicole, whom I've known from my college days, was pretending all along? If she was promiscuous, like her mother and sister, I would have noticed. Before dating Nicole in school, I had ladies who I had easily been with, up until the time of our engagement. Nicole was yet to even lay with me. A promiscuous lady would not do that. My parents suggested that I did not act in haste, but took out time to further watch and test Nicole just to verify if she was truly sincere with me. I took my parents' advice, and 2 months before our wedding, I called Nicole to tell her that we had to put the wedding on pause because I'd lost my job and could not get married to her since there was no means of building and sustaining a home without finance. Nicole broke the news to her family that the intended wedding was being postponed because of my job loss, and her family reacted just the way I expected them to. They told Nicole to break off the engagement and cut ties with me because I had no future. My parents and I were stunned as Nicole did not join them in their stupidity. My parents and I were really impressed when Nicole went against all odds just to make sure we were not separated. Even though she worked in another city, she began visiting me more often and even gave me a certain amount of money just to keep me going. She promised to cover the cost of the wedding and told me empathetically that we were not pushing it off. My heart melted when she said that. What belonged to her equally belonged to me, and that included her money. My parents and I both sat back and watched as Nicole carried on with the wedding cost, and the beauty of the whole thing was that she never disrespected me. She did not even make a move without seeking my consent. We were living in different cities, and so it was easy to disguise as being jobless, but I had to come clean a month to the wedding because Nicole had passed the test. She'd proven to me that she loved me regardless of what I owned. My parents were present the day when I called Nicole to inform her about the lie. I told her that I still had my job and all my money, and my parents equally sought her forgiveness that day because they've doubted her loyalty to me previously. Everything was back to normal, except for the relationship between my family and Nicole's family. A relationship that was always sour. The wedding day soon came, and well, it was a day to remember, but not for the joy and gladness which it should have brought. Oh no, it was quite the opposite. Nicole's family embarrassed us in front of delegates from her firm and mine. Her father could not exercise a little bit of self-control as he got drunk and began messing stuff up, while her older sister was busy throwing herself from one man to the other, not minding the fact that she was a single mother of 2 children. They literally stole the show from us on our wedding day. I was displeased with my in-laws, but I overlooked the whole thing with time. However, the anger which Nicole had for her parents that day only grew worse. Nicole and I both went on a brief honeymoon which lasted for just 2 weeks, after which we returned to the separate cities where we worked. We'd been working on her finding a job in the city where I lived, and I was already discussing with my boss about the possibility of her coming to work with us. Days soon turned to weeks and weeks to months, and we were yet to get my wife in the city, where I was, and this meant that she continued working and living outside the city. We only had time for ourselves on weekends, and this was the mistake we made. As couples, we were not supposed to be separated, much more as newlyweds. My in-laws began visiting the apartment where I stayed, and they had one favor for me to ask. I was not really keen on rendering them assistance because they've labeled me such as a suitor without a future, and embarrassed my wife and I during our wedding. But then I knew that the only way I could get them off my back was just to do the little that I could. I knew that at some point, though, I was going to have to draw boundaries, but it was too early to do that. My marriage to their daughter was less than a month old. I, however, kept my wife ignorant about the whole thing. The disturbances from my in-laws were already too much, but I was in for trouble. My sister-in-law, Wendy, began taking advantage of the fact that my wife was living apart from me. She would drop into my house unannounced at odd hours in the night with the claim that she was stranded, and she was always reluctant going back. The interesting part was that she always found a reason to make body contact with me while she was around. I'm no child. I had been the ladies' man before getting married, and I could certainly tell when a lady was hitting on me. It was one of such times. I tried my best to avoid cheating on my wife the best that I could, but the more I pushed my sister-in-law away, the more the pressure came. I finally fell for her seduction and cheated on my wife, Nicole. I felt bad cheating on my wife, but I would not lie. The experience was absolutely thrilling. Wendy would abandon her kids with her parents and come spend days at my place. It was almost as though we were a couple, except for the fact that she was not as homely as my wife. I would leave for work, return only to find the house worse than I've left it, and she never really cooked. Besides the sex, there was absolutely nothing else that she brought to the table. Wendy and I continued like that until my wife called to let me know that she'd obtained a 2-month leave and would be spending time with me. I had to ask Wendy to leave, and my wife came back home, and she broke the news to me that she was 2 months pregnant. I felt really uneasy around her. That was my guilty conscience dealing with what I've done. My wife, Nicole, observed a change in my attitude even in the bedroom. I could not relate with her sexually. I brought up work and stress as being responsible for my condition, though I knew it was a lie. I thought I had things under control until about a week later, when my wife's sister, Wendy, showed up at her home at night. The fact that I had an affair with Wendy gave her the courage to barge in on us like she owned the dang home. My wife opened the door late at night, and it was her sister asking to be let in. Nicole was not going to let her in the house as she was still angry that both her sister and parents had ruined her day. But I had to intervene and plead with her. This was because I knew that Wendy could expose us if I did not find a means to support her. My wife was not really happy, but because I got involved, we had to let Wendy spend the night. Wendy was to leave the next morning, but she did not. She came up to me with an excuse why she had to spend 3 days at our place. To make matters worse, she did not beg. She just said what she wanted to do, and my wife was not going to let her older sister come into her house and run her home, so she almost picked a fight with her. I had to quickly intervene once again in favor of my sister-in-law, and my wife could just not understand why. I told my wife that we had just gotten married and it was too early to start fighting her family. Besides, it was just 3 days. The next 3 days were days of misery for my wife, horror for me, and gladness for my sister-in-law. She moved around the house like she owned the place, and it so pained my wife because I'd restrained her from confronting her sister. Wendy finally left when 3 days was up, and I secretly gave her some money to stay away, but she never did. 2 weeks later, and Wendy began calling me to blackmail me for money. She was willing to come clean about the affair that we had. My wife, Nicole, was still around, and when it got to the point where I could no longer deal with it anymore, I opened up to Nicole. Nicole was heartbroken by my confession. She refused speaking to me for days, and I did not blame her. I cheated on her with her sister, and what betrayal could be worse than that? After days of silence, I had to go to my parents and tell them about what I've done. Because the way my wife was going, she was putting both her health and her health of my unborn child at risk. My parents, well, they were not happy with me to say the least. But they decided to help save my marriage, and my parents came to plead with my wife on my better behalf. Well, she did finally forgive me. She accepted the fact that the distance between us made me succumb to my sister's plan. After my parents have settled the issue, my wife and I decided to keep calm as though we had no idea what was happening. My wife did not go back to her job in the other city. She immediately resigned to nurse her pregnancy and preserve her marriage while we partially waited for an avenue to deal with her sister. Opportunity soon presented itself when her sister Wendy barged into our home one day and dropped off her 2 sick kids, while demanding that they stay with us for 3 days so she could attend a job interview. What a liar she was. Which job interview lasts for 3 days? She just wanted my wife and I to take care of her sick children while she went sleeping around for 3 days. I guess she felt that I would play along because I had a secret to protect. Well, my wife and I did play along. We took care of the sick kids for 3 days, and while we expected her to come back and pick up her kids, we summoned both families, my wife's parents and mine, and in the midst of everyone present, I proceeded to confess my cheating to my in-laws. Wendy was shocked as she never saw this one coming. I equally told them about the blackmail and extortion which she was trying to do. While my in-laws were trying to process the whole thing, I produced a copy of the restraining order my wife and I had obtained against her family members. I further informed her that I'd opened a case against her at the police, and I would charge her for blackmail and extortion if she did not stay away. They all left in shame, and my wife and I lived peacefully finally. Okay, so this story was so much to wrap your head around, I don't even know where to start. First off, I'll ask a question, and let's see if you guys can answer this in the comment section. Who was the worst character in this entire story? I need to know answers. Tell me your exact thoughts, guys. Thank you once again for tuning in to this one story. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, the best way to support me is very simple. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have an amazing day.